Happy Sunday, beautiful patrons. As always, it is a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. And thank you for loving. Don't hesitate to share this Patreon page with your friends. We could definitely use the support and the encouragement. But as always, thank you for what you do. This week, I used as an analogy untangling an extension cord. And as you undoubtedly remember, we started off by bringing up many different points of untangling an issue. And I hope that you caught on that what I was really talking about was untangling the complexities of life. And the first obstacle that we encountered was that there was a rope embedded within this knotted mess, and the rope didn't belong, that there are parts of conversations that don't belong in the dialogue. There are issues within our dilemmas that don't belong in the situation. And so sometimes we need to ferret out what does belong, what doesn't belong, so that we can focus on what truly does matter. Then we moved on to the loops and the twist that exist in every situation. As I've mentioned several times before, if there's anything that I believe that I have brought to the secular movement in regards to the conversation about moving or graduating from our religious traditions, and in particular, the conversation in regards to non-believing ministers, I feel that what I have added to the conversation is an emphasis on the complexity that exists in these situations, the complexity of life, the complexity of making these transitions, the many loops and twists that exist. And so, as we continued to talk about these different things, I now move towards a little deeper questioning of the subject altogether. Whenever we are attempting to apply our patience to unraveling the issues of our lives, the issues of our identities, the issues of what we want our ultimate destinies to be, the issues of our directions, the issues of our relationships, we have to back up and look at these subjects from a completely objective point of view and ask ourselves, whose rope is this? Whose cord is this? This situation that I find myself in, who actually has ownership of this circumstance? Who actually has responsibility of this situation? Is it really me? Is it mine to fix? Or am I feeling obligated? Am I feeling compelled for some unknown reason, or at least unknown to me at this moment, reason to try to be the problem solver of not just this situation, but if you're like me, of every situation? Do I still feel religiously compelled to be the savior of the world? If you're like me and you once were deeply embedded in religious tradition, particularly evangelical religious tradition that holds our culture hostage at this moment, then undoubtedly you received the calling, you received the mantle, you received the burden, the obligation, the responsibility to try to save the world. And if not the entire world, then at least save your little piece of the world. The blood would be on your hands if you did not. And though we, through intellectual exercise, through the great challenging of our consciousness, though we grow and we expand and we move forward in our understanding of theology and our understanding of doctrine and our understanding of history, and we find ourselves finally with a PhD of liberation, and we've graduated from our religious tradition, unbeknownst to us during that entire experience, not just the transforming, not just the transitioning out, but obviously the entire life prior to that phase shift, our personalities were changed by that. who we are today is very much predicated on who we were yesterday. And for many of us, who we were the saviors of the world. We were tasked, we were obligated, we were, at least the way it's presented to us, gifted with this challenge of attempting to save the world. So it's okay now to back up as we find ourselves running out of patience, trying to untangle circumstances, trying to make sure that we get every little piece of rope out that doesn't belong, trying to make sure that we unknot every loop and every twist, trying to make sure that we literally exhaust ourselves with patience of trying to make the world work and make everyone else's work. It's okay for us to back up and say, is this my damn rope? Is this mine? Is this mine to do? Or does someone else have responsibility of this rope? Is this someone else's knot to untangle? And it's okay to do that, and it feels selfish, and it feels like we're somehow being a traitor to our cause. But it's okay. It's okay. Yes, taking responsibility is the number one thing that we need to do in our lives to create positive change, but we do not have to take responsibility for that which does not belong to us. We may choose to do so through an act of charity. Our humanistic values may motivate us later on to take responsibility for something that doesn't belong to us, but those choices need to be made clearly and consciously, no longer running on religious autopilot. And so, when it comes to taking responsibility, when we determine that this is our knot to untangle, this does belong to us, then oftentimes when I find myself in that situation and I seem to not be able to get things untangled, I have to back up and say, you know what? It was more than likely my technique, my way of handling situations that got this thing so tangled up in the first place, when it truly is a situation that I am responsible for, that belongs to me. My example of that is right now my habitual technique for wrapping these cords up is to start in my hand and wrap it underneath my elbow and bring it back up to my hand. And over time it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And for some cords this works pretty good. But just because it works good for some cords doesn't mean it works well for all cords, because some cords have different characteristics, different properties, and those different properties have to be accounted for. But my model, what I normally do, my methodology is just to wrap it and wrap it and wrap it from palm to elbow. And whenever I get to the end, I find that I've just about imprisoned myself with this habit. That this habit becomes an unconscious prison that I don't even realize I'm in until I get in a real bind, until things get really, really tight. And then it begins to dawn on me that I've functioned purely out of habit and that my technique is failing me. And when I start to try to pry that out from under my elbow or bend my wrist backwards in order to open my palm up and release the now looped cord, all of a sudden I can see where the loops come from, where the twists come from, because this isn't the right technique for this particular circumstance. Now, before I beat myself up too bad because I've now unintentionally created what will be a future dilemma that I will have to work very hard and exercise my patience on to untangle, I have to remind myself that I didn't invent this technique, that I'm modeling this after someone that I saw, someone of very strong impression. I probably saw the right person at the right time with the right strength of personality in my life that I saw at once, and that was now the model from there on. And that I was running unconsciously, and that I was not intentionally trying to do harm, but the me of yesterday was doing the best that I could. It's one reason that I constantly tell people not to judge themselves today too hard, and not to judge themselves of yesterday too hard, because the you of yesterday is just like the you today, doing everything you can as right as you can for the moment. And just like you know with your whole heart that you're trying to do the best you can today, so were you yesterday and a year from ago and a decade ago. You were doing the best you could. You were living out the models that you had seen. So obviously what we need in the positive twist, if you will, on this very tangled subject is that we simply need new models. We need to look out with conscious awareness that our old model doesn't work for that situation. And by being aware of it, being conscious of it, we're able to take control over that habit and not allow it to bring us into a state of autopilot, but instead we look for new models. Strong models that make instant impressions and create new habits within us. And if we can't find a strong model that instantly changes our brain patterns and creates new habits in the way that we deal with situations, then we need to find good impressions, even though they're weaker, and be exposed to them multiple times, over and over and over and over again, being exposed to them until they have a positive effect on how we look at life, on how we handle any given situation. It does make a difference who our friends are, because they may not always have strong impressions on us, but they can have multiple weak impressions and over time change the way that we act. My grandfather gave me such wonderful, wonderful advice so many years ago in relationship to marriage and longevity of marriage. He said, Jerry, he said, when me and your mama first started out, when we first got married, he said, all of our friends, they would pick at each other. And I know this isn't the case for everyone, but this was true for him. He said, all of our other married couple friends, the husband and wife would all pick at each other. And he said, you know, it's cute and it's funny and they laugh and everyone else in the room laughs. He says, but you know, that comes from a true feeling. It comes from something that is true. And over time, it begins to have an effect. After a while, there's no one else in the room and the picking is still happening and it begins to feel more personal. And he said, all of the couples that we got married with, he said, none of them are still together today. He says, but we never picked up that habit and we never picked at each other that way and we're still here. Well, I can tell you, after living with both Mama and Papa for as long as I did, I know there's a lot of reasons that they stayed together as long as they did. But that may be just one contributing factor. All those other couples, maybe they should have never been together in the first place. And I can definitely not say that picking at each other was the downfall. But it's a good example of how there are multiple models and that we're constantly being impressed and our personality being changed by those that are around us, and particularly those from our past that had very strong religious influences. So today, being Sunday, is actually the first day of a new week. And as the first day of a new week at the beginning of a new year, all of which is obviously relative and doesn't actually exist on this little pale blue ball flying through the universe. But for our culture and for our moment, let's allow it to exist and let's say new days, new impressions. New impressions, new models, new techniques. New techniques, less knots. I wish this for you, and I wish this for me. So happy Sunday to you whenever you're listening to this. Thank you for your love, and thank you for being so brave.